The United Nations is broke and the Muslims are suffering. It's because of Donald Trump. He refused to pay for the UN missions. The United Nations is the largest UN contributor. But Trump wasn't happy about it. He thinks the UN is draining American money and the UN doesn't really achieve any results. Then the other nations started to do the same. Money stopped flowing into the UN. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres had to write a letter and send it to member nations to let the world know the UN is running out of money. And soon it will collapse. They predict the UN will hit $0 in July 2026. But they are turning off escalators in the UN Geneva headquarters to save money. Rumor is they are even turning off heaters to keep things running at the UN. Of course, the UN has had this kind of crisis in the past, but the Secretary General warns us this is categorically different. Then the guy started to beat around the bush in the media. He doesn't point fingers, but everyone knows where he isn't pointing: Trump. This almost sounds like the UN is ending. League of Nations match? But how does it affect the Muslims? Well, yeah, here's how. If the UN runs out of cash, food programs and health programs will stop. These programs mostly spend their money on the Middle East and the Muslim countries. This is not even the worst they are going to suffer, but Trump's refusing to pay the UN. Trump's only interested in making his own United Nations. It's called the Board of Peace. Trump doesn't enjoy the slow-moving UN policies. The procedures takes too long and the UN ends up doing nothing. But the UN is a deadlock that stops any nation from ever dominating the world. The UN Security Council is supposed to be that final deadlock. Therefore, stopping total distraction. If anybody wants to take over the world, they wouldn't want the UN being effective because the UN is the deadlock. So if the UN falls, the deadlock disappears. Then all previously signed international treaties under the UN become ineffective. Then the world will be every nation for themselves. But the UN Secretary General still stands tall. As long as he's there, the UN shall survive. The Geneva headquarters is now turning off escalators and heaters to save money for the missions. He will do anything. Even so, it will only last until July 2026. It has become 12 months since the UN agencies are suffering slow death everywhere. But the US only decided to pay $2 billion, which is way lower than the usual $17 billion. And the NATO countries did the same. Not just that, they even reduced foreign aids. This means the UN agencies will have stricter and slower movements. Then it affects the Muslims? Yes, horribly so. The UN Women Program deals with mothers and babies around the world, and they just shut down clinics in Afghanistan. Many more in other Muslim countries will also follow soon. But there is more. The UN human rights will now stop most activities in the world. This means people in Gaza and many others will have no one helping them. Then more crimes against humanity may appear. All of this seems like the end of an era. One of the only things the UN does effectively is providing food and shelter for the refugees. But the UN cannot even do that properly anymore now. They had to cut rations for the refugees. Then who will help these people? Trump's not so sure about that. He is keen on making the Board of Peace more productive than the UN. But we're not so sure about this Board of Peace idea. The last time a world government took a dive, a world war happened. What if the fall of the UN marks the end of an old world order? I wonder how many people will suffer during this transition period. Can the UN truly be able to survive longer than 2030?